All right, we are moving into section 3 of the second initiation of Jesus and from Bethlehem to Calvary. In this intimate episode in the life of Jesus Christ, we are given perhaps the first real insight into the processes of his innermost mind. The following words open the story and are significant. And though a voice from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased," then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. It's from Matthew. This story of the temptation in the wilderness is most controversial. Many questions have been propounded, and much agony of soul has been experienced by the serious believer who endeavors to reconcile common sense, Christ's divinity, and the devil. Was it possible that Christ could in reality be tempted? And if so, could he have fallen into sin? Did he meet these temptations as the omnipotent Son of God, or did he meet them as man and therefore subject to temptation? What is meant by the devil? And what was the relation of Christ to evil? Had this wilderness story never been told to us, what would have been our attitude to Christ? What really took place in the consciousness of Christ while in the wilderness? For what purpose are we permitted to share with him this experience? Many such questions arise in the mind of the intelligent man, and many have been the commentaries written to prove the particular point of each writer. It is not the purpose of this book to deal with the difficult subject of evil, nor to define the times when Christ was functioning as a man and when he was functioning as a Son of God. Some believe that he was simultaneously both and was very God of very God. And that's from the Athanasian Creed. And yet essentially and utterly human at the same time. People make these statements, but they are apt to forget the implications. The inference is that we are allowed to know about the temptation in order to teach us, as human beings, a needed lesson. Let us therefore study the story from the angle of Christ's humanity, never forgetting that he had learned obedience to the divine spirit, the soul and man, and was in control of his body of manifestation. He was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. That's from Hebrews. He came in a human body and was subject to human conditions as also we are. He suffered and agonized. He felt irritation and was conditioned by his body, his environment, and the period, as we all are. But because he had learned to master himself, and because the wheel of life had done its work with him, he could face this experience and meet evil face to face and triumph. He taught us thereby how to meet temptation, what to expect as disciples preparing for initiation, and the method whereby evil can be turned into good. He met temptation with no great new technique or revelation. He simply fell back on what he knew and he had been taught and what he had been taught and told. He met temptation in each time with "it is written" from Matthew, and employed no new powers to combat the devil. He simply utilized the knowledge which he had. He used no divine powers to overcome the evil one. He simply used those which we all possess, acquired knowledge and the age-old rules. He conquered because he had taught himself to overcome. He was the master of conditions at the time because he had learned to master himself. Such a mastery by the soul may indeed be utterly beyond our immediate attaining, but the command of Christ stands for all time. Be ye therefore perfect. also from Matthew. And someday we too shall meet the temptations in the wilderness, and also come forth as he, unsullied and undefeated. Such experience is inevitable for all and cannot eventually be escaped. Christ did not escape it, and neither shall we. It is the possibility of being tempted, says Dr. Selby, which shows the real greatness of human nature. Apart from it, we should be merely unmoral creatures. It is the capacity to choose between ends and the actions leading to them, and the possibility of sin emerges. And that's from a book by Dr. Selby called Psychology of Religions. This calls for more than superficial consideration. Humanity itself is at stake in the wilderness story. The whole world of material things, of desire and of ambition, was arrayed before Christ, and because he reacted as he did, and because none of these aspects of life could affect him, we too can stand free, assured of our own ultimate victory. Christ as man achieved victory. We too can do the same. To this triumph of the soul over matter and of reality over the unreal, Christ gave testimony in the wilderness experience, and it is towards the same goal that all who follow in his steps are moving. The triumph which was his will be ours when we meet the problem in the spirit in which he met it, turning the light of the soul upon it and resting back upon past experience. In the baptism initiation, Christ's purity and freedom from evil had been demonstrated before them. Now they have to undergo a different test. From the crowd and from the experience, he went, with a capital H, he went to the solitary place, and for 40 days and nights he was alone with himself, standing between God and the evil one. Through what agency could this evil force reach him? Through the agency of his own human nature, through the medium of loneliness, of hunger, and of his own visions. Christ was thrown back on himself, and there, in the silence of the desert, alone with his thoughts and desires, he was tested throughout all the parts of his nature which might be vulnerable. He is, as he is, so are we in this world. That's from John, 1 John. Vulnerable in all points. The difficulty with most of us is that we are vulnerable in so many petty ways, and in every trifling situation, we are apt to fall. The crux of the situation, as far as Christ was concerned, was that these three temptations were climaxing tests in which the three aspects of the lower nature were involved. They were synthetic temptations. In them was no petty, trifling, silly tempting, but the gathering up of the forces of the threefold lower man, physical, emotional, and mental, into one last effort to control the Son of God. Evil is thus constituted, and we shall all someday have to face this testing. This triple evil, this devil, such as Christ faced. 3 times he was tempted, and 3 times he resisted. And only after this capacity to react to form and to material benefit had been finally put aside was it possible for Christ to pass on to his world service and the Mount of Transfiguration. One of the finest thinkers in the field of Christian interpretation today tells us that all they who are destined for the kingdom must win forgiveness for the guilt contracted in the earthly aeon by encountering steadfastly the world power as it collects itself for a last attack. That's pretty telling, I think, right? For through this guilt, they were still subject to the power of ungodliness. This guilt constitutes a counterweight which holds back the coming of the kingdom. And that's from The Mystery of the Kingdom of God by Albert Schweitzer again. So we deal a lot with, there's a lot of guilt built into this. Christ faced this last attack and emerged victorious, thus guaranteeing to us our ultimate victory. The devil approached Jesus with 40 days of solitary communion when the 40 days of solitary communion were over. We are told what Christ did in those 40 days. We are not told what Christ did in those 40 days. No account is given to us of his thought and determinations, his realization and consecration at that time. He faced the future and at the end encountered the tests which released him from the power of his human nature. As we study the life of Jesus, this solitariness emerges ever more clearly. The great souls are always lonely souls. They tread unaccompanied the most difficult parts of the long way of return. Christ was ever lonely. His spirit drove him again and again into isolation. The great religious conceptions which haunt the imaginations of civilized mankind are scenes of solitariness. Prometheus chained to his rock, Muhammad brooding in the desert, the meditations of the Buddha, the solitary man on the cross. It belongs to the depth of the religious spirit to have felt forsaken even by God. And that's from a book called Religion in the Making by A.N. Whitehead. And another good reflection there, something to think about in our own lives. Christ's life alternated between the crowd whom he loved and the silence of the solitary places. First, he is to be found in the daily life of the family experience, where the intimacies of personalities can so sadly imprison the soul. Thence, he passed into the solitary desert and was alone. He returned and his public life began, until the publicity and noise and clamor of this were succeeded by the deep and interior silence of the cross, where, forsaken of all, he went through the deep dark night of the soul, utterly alone. Yet it is in these moments of complete silence when the soul is thrown back upon itself and there is no one to help, no hand to aid, and no voice to strengthen, that those revelations come and that clear insight is developed, which enable a Savior to emerge for the helping of the world. Christ was tempted of the devil. It is necessary in a book such as this to give an interpretation of the devil? That's a question. Is it not apparent that there are in the world today two dominant concepts, both of them passing out as factors in the consciousness of the young, and therefore determining their later beliefs? The devil and Saint Nicholas or Father Christmas. These names embody opposing ideas. Each of them symbolizes one of the two major problems with which man has in his daily life to deal. These are called by the Oriental philosophers the pairs of opposites. And surely it is the manner in which man handles these two aspects of life and his subjective attitude to them, which determine whether his life reacts to evil or to good. The devil is the symbol of that which is not humanly divine. For there are evil things done by man, which, when done by animal, are not so regarded. A man or a fox, for instance, may raid a chicken coop, but in one case, a moral law is broken, and in the other, a natural instinct is followed. An animal may kill another animal in rage or in defense of its female, but when a man does the same, it is called murder, and he is duly punished. Father Christmas is the embodiment of that which is selfless. He is the symbol of giving and of Christ's spirit. He therefore stands to man as a reminder of God, just as this other figment of the imagination, the devil, with horns and tail, Okay, I had a visitor. Sorry about that. Let's see where I was. Father Christmas is the embodiment of that which is selfless. He is the symbol of giving and of the Christ spirit. He therefore stands to man as a reminder of God, just as this other figment of the imagination, the devil with horns and tail, is a reminder of that which is not God, that which is not divine. And if you hadn't heard these things before, and this is kind of the first, this is just the devil is just our lower nature, and it's worth looking into in the ageless wisdom and diving in a little bit, because we really don't understand sin as we should, or what is good and evil. It's very tricky and requires a lot of discernment to really get down to the nitty-gritty of it all. Some things that we do, on a daily basis end up being not real good, and then we think that they're okay, but then find out later that they're really not. And then also it's all relative, because on another level there is no duality, and it's all just one, right? So it depends on our perspective and how we're approaching this. The key is supplied by mythology. The myths demand a serious interpretation in correspondence with objective reality. They must not be treated as pure poetry without any solid truth behind them, a mere play of the imagination. The garment which clothes the substance may be as fabulous, as fantastic, as inconsistent, and as patchy as you please, but this does not alter the fact that popular mythology tells of an invisible reality and of mysterious figures, remember, not forces, at work everywhere. Everything is alive and possesses a soul. The world is full of spirits, of souls. The myths speak of them. Who invented these myths? Nobody, for inventions are arbitrary, are fiction, but these tales are accepted by those who tell them and by their audience as unquestioned truth. The psychology of the primitive compels him to regard things in this way magically. What in our more developed and more individual psychology has become a subconscious, in which the collective life or our ancestors is still operative, is the normal psychology of the primitive, a state of natural, I don't know this word. This is I don't even remember having read this word, somnambulism, with its distinctive forms of sensitiveness, telepathy, and second sight, a direct apprehension akin to the artist's of the whole in its parts, of the essential in a multiplicity of detail. And that's by Religions of Mankind by Otto Carr. Yeah, it's interesting when you read these quotes, when you're, I'm very, get used to reading the Master DK and Alice Bailey, and, as it was written by them. And then when you read the quotes or references from other books, it does kind of throw you off a bit, because their writing styles are all, very different. But to this, the symbols of the devil and of Father Christmas bear testimony, embodiments of the primal dualities in the realm of quality. Man's entire existence as man is spent swinging between these pairs of opposites until eventually the balance is achieved, and from then on, he moves towards that which is divine. It might profit all of us if we ponder along and deeply at times upon these two extremities of human existence, good and evil, light and dark, life and form, spirit and matter, the self and the not self, the real and the unreal, truth and falsehood, right and wrong, pleasure and pain, the urge and the drag, the soul and the personality, Christ and the devil, and Christ and the devil. So, I remember sitting down one time and I just had, I don't even know how long it was, I had all these dualities coming through my head and all the paradoxes of this whole thing. And I just sat there just in amazement of how these opposites are just around us. It's just all day. It's from the time we wake up, and then we need to get a hold of these things. So it is a great contemplation / meditation to try to distinguish these things. And these last two, the problem of the three temptations is summed up, which was Christ and the devil. These dualities have also been defined as finiteness and infinity, which are the characteristics, one of man, the other of God. Finiteness and infiniteness and infinity. That which emphasizes our finite nature is of humanity, that which is comprehensive of God, that which is comprehensive is of God. We shall see in our study of these three temptations how clearly the distinctions between the dualities emerge. Christ in the temptations could not contradict himself, and thus identifying himself with perfection, he gives us a presentation of a human being in the world and yet not of the world. In John, tempted of the devil, yet free from wrong reaction to the devil's suggestions. Thus he was a free soul, which is a divine soul, untrammeled by desire and its tests, undefiled by the flesh and its temptations, and liberated from the sins of the mental processes. Such is the will of God for each and all of us, and the writer quoted above says, there cannot be freedom unless the divine will is genuinely one with that of finite beings in a single personality. The value and destiny of the individual by Basanquet. Such a personality was Christ. Good is the contradiction of evil, and Christ's attitude to the devil was one of uncompromising contradiction. In this, he clarified the issue and did what all souls can do. Herein, as I have earlier pointed out, lies his uniqueness and his distinction. It consists in the basic fact of his utilizing those methods of service, triumph, and sacrifice which are available to any of us. Many in the past have died for others. Many have faced evil with uncompromising opposition. Many have dedicated their lives to service, but none have succeeded with the completeness and perfection of Christ. His greatness, it cannot be too often reiterated, lies in his universality. That doctor that we just mentioned before deals with this question of personality as follows. What I am urging is rather that our true personality lies in our concrete best, and that in desiring its development and satisfaction, we are desiring an increase of our real individuality, though a diminution of our formal exclusiveness. It will be rejoined that true individuality, greatness of range and organization, arguments, personal distinctions, as well as comprehensiveness. Undoubtedly, but it decreases exclusiveness. The great world men are not born simply of their earthly parents. Whole ages and countries are focused in them. In desiring a highly developed perfection, we are desiring to be something which can no longer be identified either with or by the incidents of the terrestrial life. Well, isn't that sound pretty interesting and worth another look? The great world men are not born simply of their earthly parents. All right, so that's pretty deep there. Whole ages and countries are focused in them. That's intense there, right? If these words are studied in connection with Christ's temptations, the wonder of what he did emerges and is encouraging for all of us, his younger brothers, equally sons of God. Certainly. Therefore, as a whole man and yet utterly divine, Christ entered into final combat with the devil. As a human being in whom the divine spirit was fully expressing itself, he faced the evil in his own humanity when viewed apart from God and emerged victorious. Let us not attempt to divorce these two, God and man. When we think of Christ, some thinkers emphasize his humanity and ignore his divinity. Therein, they are surely in error. Others emphasize his divinity and regard as blasphemous and wrong all those who have placed him on an equality with other human beings. Well, he did that himself, if we read, so I don't even understand how that perspective can come into play in my, on a personal level. But if we regard Christ as the flower of the human race, because the divine spirit had full control and showed forth through the medium of the human form, we in no way belittle him or his achievements. Absolutely not. The further men progress upon the path of evolution, the more they become conscious of their divinity and of the fatherhood of God. At the same time, the more deeply they appreciate the Christ, the more convinced are they of his perfected divinity and his mission, and the more humbly do they seek to follow in his steps, knowing him to be the master of all masters, very God of very God, and the teachers alike of angels and of men. This opens, these understandings open us up to see the, even more of the perfection behind this whole thing, behind the whole event. It's amazing. And very thankful for these books, I'll say that. This perfected divinity is now to be tested and proved and approved. He has now to demonstrate to God, to the devil, and to humanity the nature of his achievement and how the powers of the lower nature can be overcome by the powers of the soul. These temptations can be understood very simply by all aspirants and disciples because they embody universal tests which are applied to the human nature in which we all share and with which we all wrestle in some form or in some measure. It matters not whether we do so from the prompting of consciousness, from the control of the higher nature, or through the clear light of divinity. This all disciples have ever recognized. We shall consider these three temptations in the order given by St. Matthew, which is different from that given by St. Luke, St. Mark, which is different from that given by Luke. St. Mark simply mentions that Christ was tempted of the devil, while St. John does not refer to them at all. These three temptations tested out all the three aspects of the lower human nature: the physical, emotional, desire nature, and the mind or mental nature. And we read that when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterwards a-hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, "If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread." But he answered and said, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." And that's from Matthew 4. There are two interesting facts connected with all these temptations. Each of them begins with "if" on the lips of the devil, and each is met by Christ with the words, "It is written." These two phrases link all three episodes and give the clue to the whole process. The ultimate temptation is doubt. The test we have all to face eventually, and which climaxed in Christ's life until he vanquished it upon the cross, is the test of our divinity. Are we divine? How must our divine powers express themselves? What can we do or not do because we are sons of God? That the detail of each difficulty, test, and trial may differ is relatively immaterial. That the tests may first be focused in one aspect of our lower nature or another is equally unimportant. It is the general lifelong urge to divinity which is on trial. To the man who is but a little evolved, the problem of divinity as a whole does not present itself. He can be preoccupied only with the detail, with the problem in the immediate foreground of his life. This he handles or not, as the case may be in the light of conscience. For this disciple, the detail assumes less importance, and the general truth of his sonship begins solely to concern him. He then handles his life conditions from the angle of that theory. For a perfected Son of God, such as the Christ, or for the man nearing perfection, the problem must be handled as a whole, and the life problem must be considered from the angle of divinity itself. Such was the issue with Christ, and such the implications hidden in the devil's threefold "if." Rightly or wrongly, it seems to me that we have erred in interpreting all truth from the angle of the mediocre. That is what has been done. Truth is capable of interpretation in many ways. Those who are simply physical, emotional beings, with therefore little vision, require the protection of theology despite its imperfections and dogmatic or untenable assertions. This they need, and the responsibility of those who administer dogmas to the little ones of the race is great. Oh, see, it's perfect, right? I mean, the whole thing, I mean, it's all very precisely put together here. That is, I remember having read that before, and I remember it, being profound, but reading it again is good. That's pretty intense. They need, we need these teachings in the churches for those who are physical, emotional beings. Truth must also be given in a wider form and with a more general connotation to those who are beginning to live consciously as souls, and who can therefore be trusted to see the meaning behind the symbol and the significance behind the outer appearance of theology. Truth for the perfected sons of God must be something beyond our dreams, of so deep a significance and of such comprehensiveness that it is futile for us to speculate upon it. For it is something to be experienced and not to be dreamed, something to enter and not to vision. Christ's reply each time should be viewed in this triple manner. It is written. He says, and the unthinking and small-minded regard this as endorsing the verbal inspiration of the scriptures. But surely he was not referring back only to the ancient sayings of the Jewish scriptures. Beautiful as they are, the possibilities of error are too great to warrant our unquestioning acceptance of every word in any scripture in the world. When the processes of translation are studied, this becomes glaringly apparent. Christ meant something much deeper than the Bible says. He meant that the signature of God was upon him, that he was the Word, and that word was the expression of truth. So it is written, that's what it is written meant. He meant that the signature of God was written on him, and he was the Word, and that word was the expression of truth. It is the word of the soul, which is the influx of divinity that determines our attitude in temptation and our response to the problem presented by the devil. If that word is remote, deep hidden by the veiling form, only distorted sounds will issue forth, and the word will not be potent enough to withstand the devil. The word is written in the flesh, defaced and almost invisible, though it may be, through the activity of the lower nature. It is upon the mind that the word sounds forth, carrying illumination and insight, distorted as yet though the vision may be, and the light scarcely seen. But the word is there. Someday each of us can say with power, "It is written," and see that word expressed in every part of our human nature as individuals and at some distant date in humanity itself. This is the lost word of the Masonic tradition. Very good. I hope we're able to pick up on that. That's pretty key section there. Oriental philosophers refer frequently to 4 spheres of life, or 4 problems which all disciples and aspirants have to face, and which constitute in their entirety the world in which we live. There are the world of Maya, the world of glamour, and the world of illusion. There's also that mysterious dweller on the threshold, to which Bulwer Lytton refers to in Zanoni. All these 4 Christ met and vanquished in the desert experience. Maya refers to the world of physical forces in which we dwell, and with this, the first temptation concerned itself. Modern science has told us that there is nothing visible or invisible which is not energy, and that every form is simply an aggregate of energy units in constant ceaseless motion to which we have to adjust ourselves and in which we live and move and have our being. Such is the outer form of deity, and we are a part of it. Maya is vital in character, and we know little of its effect upon the physical plane, with all that term connotes, and upon the human being. Glamour refers, Maya's very deep, man. That's a whole study in and of itself, but is also heavily discussed in the other books. So although that was a quick description, we know little upon its effects. Maya is the world of physical forces in which we dwell. And I guess that's really all we kind of got there. Modern science tells there's nothing visible and invisible. Yeah, we didn't get much from that. So, but Maya is deserves another study. Glamour refers to the world of emotional being and of desire in which all forms dwell. Glamour refers to the world of emotional being and of desire in which all forms dwell. It is this glamour which colors all our lives and produces false values, wrong desires, needless so-called necessities, our worries, anxieties, and cares. But glamour is age-old and has us in so close a grip that there seems little we can do. The desires of men down the centuries have brought about a situation before which we turn back appalled. The rampant nature of our longings and wishes and their glamorous effects upon the individual provide psychological laboratories with all their material. The wish life of the race has been wrongly oriented, and human desire has been turned outward to the material plane, thus producing the world of glamour in which we all habitually struggle. It is by far the most potent of our delusions or mistaken orientations. But once the clear light of the soul is thrown into it, this miasma of forces is gradually dissipated. This work constitutes the major task of all aspirants today. And it's such a huge study. Glamour is such a huge study. They wrote a book. It's one of the books of the Ageless Wisdom, and from Alice Bailey, is called Glamour. And that may be a book that, hopefully we get to read someday here in the not so distant future on video. Illusion is more mental in its impact. It concerns the ideas whereby we live in the thought life, which more or less, although mostly less, governs our daily undertakings. We shall see, as we take up the consideration of these three temptations, how in the first temptation, Christ was confronted by Maya with physical forces of such strength that the devil could take advantage of them in an effort to confound him. We shall see how in the second temptation, he was tempted by glamour, and with the submergence of his vital spiritual life by a misconception and an emotional use of his divine powers. The sin of mind, which is pride, was called into activity by the devil in the third temptation, and the illusion of temporal power to be used for right ends, we may be sure was presented to him. Thus, the possible interior weakness of the three aspects of Christ's nature was tested, and through them, the vast sum total of the world, Maya, glamour, and illusion was poured in on him. Thus, he was confronted with the dweller on the threshold, which is only another name for the personal lower self, regarding it as a unified whole, and as is only the case in advanced people, disciples, and initiates. In these three words, Maya, glamour, and illusions, we have synonyms for the flesh, the world, and the devil, which constitute the threefold test that confronts every son of God on the verge of liberation. That's pretty deep right there. I think we're going to stop there for today and let some of that settle. Definitely all that requires much more understanding, but our understanding in this particular case is about the three temptations which Christ faced, and that we are facing as humanity, and we're also facing as the individual. So, this is kind of like we can get a really good grasp on this prior to those things and go into this knowing, which is amazing. All right. Well, some of us will, some of us won't, or but some will inevitably be able to use this material. in a very intelligent way. So, all right, well, we'll get back started at that point tomorrow. Have a good day.